Hi there, greetings once again. This is Clifford Bates, and welcome to our second reading session of Reading Thucydides Peloponnesian War. We're using the Strassler edition of the landmark Thucydides. We're using it by Google Books. I'll be moving the screen around just to kind of where things like where they are here. Like I'll show you here with this. I'll move the screen around. We'll be moving the screen around as we have to read these different sections of this. I think this is the better way to do it. I'm sorry that it's going this way, but it's going to have to because of we're using this so that you can read along. It sucks because like any this is what's really wrong with the pubs is that they suck. They collapse things that they don't work together. They want to you want to be able to move it around, and therefore things like in this book, see the things over here, like if you see I put the thing up like this. This is really the previous. This is at the end of the section. So therefore, it's ironic where in the book it's not at the end of the section; it's on the side. So what's useful in a book becomes completely misleading and screwed it up. So I'm going to have to go over. We talked about first 17 chapters. I'll go over 18 again because 18 is at the end. We thought this would be 18 here, but no, I again screwed it up. I also have to correct myself that this is not. I forgot the landmark does not Roman numeralize the book numbers. They put the Italian, usually in classical editions of things of older texts. The book would be in Latin Roman numerals, and the chapters would be in Arabic numbers. And I made a mistake of thinking that this is maybe sections. But there's a lot of sections here. The way you navigate in a Thucydides text is books, chapters, and line numbers. And the line numbers will be here, like here. This would be the line 2, line 3. There's actually like this is the not line but sentences they'd say, but sometimes the translations here would break up the sentences. Um, why is this? It is a way to go through the text. Therefore, Thucydides chapters are very small compared to other people's in this sense, and so therefore the chapters are going to be in Arabic numerals. So aren't um, book numbers. So that threw me for a second. And that's why I was like misleading you for the first session. So let's go back for a second here, just to kind of. I want to go back one little bit so we can do this. This is 17 ended here. I said 17, so 18. But the time came when the tyrants, talking about the tyrants, and the far older tyrannies of all the rest of Hellenes were, with the exception of those in Sicily, once and for all put down by Sparta. So Sparta goes around eliminating the tyrants. For this city, though it was after the settlement of the Dorians, it presented its present inhabitants. It suffered from factions for an unparalleled length of time. Still, at the very early period, obtained good laws, though, okay, and enjoyed freedom from tyrants, which was unbroken. So tyranny never occurred in Sparta in that sense. It had possessed the same form of government for more than 400 years, reckoned to the end of the late war, and has thus been in a position to arrange the affairs of other states. So, therefore, because it's stable, it's been strong, it arranges the affairs of other states. This is why they went around ending the tyrannies. Okay. Um, um, Other cities. No, not state. Again, the translation will say states. They mean cities, or a tribe. Or when they say nations, they mean there's no Greek nation in our sense, 19th century sense. There's just only the people, the Greek people, and that of all the different ethni, the ethnics, the tribes. Okay, well, the tribes also mean the kind of political unit within Athens. But what is being meant here is kind of talking about the other cities. Okay, the other political units. For not many years after the disposition of the tyrants, the Battle of Marathon was fought between the Medes and the Athenians. 10 years afterwards, barbarians returned with an armada for the subjugation of the Hellenes. Again, this is in face of this great danger, the command of the Confederate Hellenes was assumed by the Spartans in virtue by their superior power. And the Athenians, having made up their minds to abandon their city, broke up their homes, threw themselves into their ships, and became a naval people. This coalition, having repulsing the barbarians soon after, split into two sections, which included the Hellenes, who had revolted against the king, the Spartan, and as well as those who had shared in the war. At the end, the head of one stood Athens, the head of the other Sparta. The first one a naval power, the second a military power. For a short time, the league held together. Still, the Spartans and the Athenians quarreled. They made war upon each other with their allies, a duel into which all the Hellenes soon or later were drawn, though some might at first remain neutral. So that the whole period from the Median War to this current war, the Peloponnesian War, with some peaceful interviews, was spent by each power in war, either with its rival or with its revolted allies, and consequently afforded them constant practice in military matters. And that experience, which is learnt in the school of danger. In other words, that this war, this constant struggle, the struggle of the clients, and this is 18. This is 18. So not 17. This is misleading. Now, let us turn to the next chapter, 19. And 19 is a very short chapter. It's about again, the policy of Sparta was not to exact tribute from her allies, but merely to secure their subservience to her interests by establishing oligarchies in them. In other words, what is he saying? He didn't make them pay anything. They would just make them subservient to follow their interests, and they would do this by putting up an oligarchy in it, regime change, force a regime change, a change of their political order, and install an oligarchy rather than whatever government there was. And an oligarchy would be their people and people supporting them, the few who agreed with the Spartan policy and would follow Spartan's policy in matters, in larger matters. But they were not going to take any money or anything else. They just wanted to make sure you were going to be subservient to Sparta and follow Spartan lead. Um, 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 uh, uh, Now it says Athens, on the contrary, had by degrees deprived her subjects, her allies, her allies, of their ships, and imposed instead contributions in money and all, on all except Shyros and Lesbos. Both found their resources for this war separately to exceed the sums of their strength when the alliance flourished intact. Athens really taxed and demanded payment and lose that money. They didn't allow them to have ships. They required, instead of you building your navy, you give us the money. We'll build the navy. It'll be our. In other words, they didn't control it. So the Sparta was kind of a less hands-on approach. Athens, it just made sure that the oligarchs would always impose oligarchy on its neighbors. Athens, well, preferred democracy, but if you paid money, we'll be happy. You can if you're a tyrant or a oligarchy, and as long as you're paying Athens its money and it's things like this, and not undermining the Athenian policy. They didn't necessarily impose democracies. When we get to the case of the invasion of Syracuse, the invasion of Syracuse was a democracy. It wasn't, in other words, Athens wasn't about imposing democracy. Athens was about all about preserving Athenian interest, whereas the Spartans were about, you know, they cared about, oh, they didn't want to micromanage you, but they had to make sure that you'd obey, and they would have to change your regime to put people who were lackeys to them. Okay. And that's the way it goes. Both found their resources of this war separately to exceed the sums of their strengths when their alliances flourished and attacked. In other words, both states, Athens and not space, but both of these two regimes, Athens and Sparta, both really found their this a resource for this war to exceed the strength the sum of their strengths when their alliances. They even the war cost them more than what they generated normally in the time of peace when the alliance is working well. Okay, next chapter, 20. Having now given the result of my inquiries of earlier times, I grant that there will be a difficulty in believing in every particular detail. The way most men deal with tradition, even traditions of their own country, is to receive them all alike when they're delivered without applying any critical test whatsoever. The Athenians generally believed that Hipparchus was tyrant when he fell into the hands of Harmodius and Aristotion. They do not know that Hippias, the eldest son of Parisias, was really supreme, that Hipparchus and Thessalius were his brothers, and that Harmonius and Aristogon, suspecting on the very day, indeed at the very moment fixed for the deed, that information had been conveyed to Hippias by their accomplices, concluded that he had been warned. They did not attack Hippias, but not liking to risk their lives be apprehended for nothing, they fell upon Hipparchus and near the temple of the daughters of Leos and slew him as he was arranging the Athenic, Pan-Athenic procession. Um, uh, there are many other unfounded ideas current among the rest of Hellenes, even on matters of contemporary history, which have not been obscured by time. For instance, there is a notion that the Spartan king have two votes each, the fact being they have only one, and that that there is a military company of Pitani, which there being simply no such thing. So little pains to do the vulgar take in the strength of investigating the truth. Readily accept the first story that comes to hand. Now he's saying this is the 20 is about the way people accept things, traditions, and errors of those, right? Now let's turn to this next section, 21. On the whole, however, the conclusion I have drawn from from proofs quoted may, I believe, safely be relied on. In other words, these quotes of this. In other words, he's testifying to what he's quoting from or talking from and giving testimony to what is his thing. Assuredly, they will not be disturbed either by the verses of a poet displaying the exaggeration of his craft, or by the compressions of the chroniclers, compositions of the chronicles that are attractive at truth's expense. In other words, the subjects they treat uh, of being out of reach of evidence and having and time having robbed most of them historic value by enthrowing them in the region of legend. In other words, he's saying he's making fun. This is an attack on the way other people are doing it. He's saying, I'm not going to talk about legends and things like this because the poets and the chroniclers, the poets sacrifice truth for beauty, and beautiful of the verse. I'm not going to be dealing. I'm going to try to give you accounts of stuff, and I'm going to again. This reminds you of Machiavelli saying, I'm going to be giving a useful thing, right? I'm not going to be talking about big verse and do things like this. I'm going to be giving you something substantively useful. This reminds me when I read this section here, this is very much like the Epistle Dedicatory in Machiavelli in that sense, where he's going to explain why he's doing what he's doing, right? And he's going to be giving a very useful thing. And he's not going to be a poet in the sense that he's not doing. And also going to be not a chronicler who they put things in the time who sacrifice truth for, in other words, distance from the accounts of things, historical record. Okay. Turning from these, we can rest satisfied with having proceeded upon the clearest data and having arrived at conclusions as exactly as can be expected in matters of such antiquity. To come to this war, despite the known dispositions of the actors in a struggle to overrate its importance, and when it is over, to return their admiration of earlier events. Yet, an examination of the facts will show that it was much greater than the wars which preceded. In other words, he's gonna. This is what he's saying. He's saying those guys may talk about the importance of the war, but they'll go back glorifying the Persian War and glorifying the Trojan War. But this war is much more bigger, much more important, therefore much more central, and therefore worthy of attention. So therefore, he's going to again. He explains how his account is different from other accounts. Again, he's taking aim both at Homer and Hesiod, the H's, the twin H's, right? Homer and Hesiod. Not Hesiod. Yeah, Hesiod. No, I'm sorry, not Hesiod. That's one aspect. He's attacking the Homer and Hesiod, the poets, right? But he's also attacking Herodotus as well. So the triple H's, right? Herodotus, the poets, Homer and Hesiod, the great poets. Hesiod is the Theogonies and the and the Works and Days, and Homer is the Iliad and Odyssey, right? And the also some other poetry attributed to him, the Homeric hymns. Um, Herodotus is the inquiries, right? The history. Okay. Um, Thucydides is saying, "I'm going to give it," and this war is more important than what they did. Now, 21. With reference to the speeches of this history, were some delivered before the war began, while others while it was still going on. Some I heard myself, others I got from various quarters. It was in all cases difficult to carry them word for word in one's memory. So my habit was to make the speaker say what, when my opinion demanded them by the various occasions. Of of course, adhering as close as possible to the general sense of what they really said. In other words, he's saying, I couldn't get everything. I'm not going to be able to get everything historically accurate. And I'm not going to remember everything. Some things I've seen some of this. I was there. I heard it, or I've heard it directly, or I heard it by other accounts, or I've been told it, and the speeches and things are not necessarily verbatim what happened, recordings, transcripts of what happened. I'm such things. It's going to be very difficult to remember everything. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting how I think things would be said, but at the same time making it accurate to what I remember or what I've heard. Okay, so therefore that's what he's doing here. Um, uh, General sense of what they really said. Number two, and with reference to the narrative of events, far from permitting myself to derive it from the first source that came to hand, I did not even trust my own impressions. But it rests partly in what I saw myself, partly in what others told me. The accuracy of the reports being always tried by the most severe and detailed tests possible. In other words, I'm not going to just hear the sources that I heard it, someone told me, but even then would verify what is possible. In other words, my conclusions have cost me some labors from which considerable, some labors from want of coincidence. between accounts of the same occurrences by different eyewitnesses, arising sometimes from imperfect memory, sometimes from undue partiality of one side or the other. In other words, he's going to piss people off and get some trouble because of it. The absence of romance in my history will, I fear, detract somewhat from its interest, but if it is to be judged useful by those inquirers who desire exact knowledge of past as an aid to understanding the future, which in the course of human things must resemble if it does not reflect at all, I shall be content. In other words, he's saying there's no romance in here. There's no romance and things like that. So because of that, people aren't going to be interested in it. Only those who like want history or kind of an event to understand this. Because we're going to turn to this. Why? Because to understand what happened in the past will probably happen. Similar things will happen in the future. To understand the future, which is the course of human things must resemble, if it does not reflect, if it does not reflect it. And I shall be content. In other words, I should be content if people find this useful. I have written my work not as an essay, which is to win applause of the moment, but for a possession for all time. In other words, this is not to win or even support. This is so you get a good understanding of what's going on here. In other words, this is a thing for all time. He's not just writing this to get favor, but for it to be a useful thing for all time. Now, chapter 23. The Median War, the greatest achievement of past times, yet found a speedy decision in two actions, by sea and two by land. The Peloponnesian War went on very for a long time. There occurred during it disasters of a kind number, a number that no similar period of time could match. Never had so many cities been taken and laid desolate, here by a barbarian, here by the parties contending, the old inhabitants some being sometimes removed to make room for others. Neither was there so much bashing and bloodshedding, now on the field of battle, now in political strife. So therefore, physical conflict, both in battlefield but also amongst the civil strife inside themselves. The old stories of occurrences handed down by tradition but scantily confirmed by experience suddenly ceased to be incredible. There were earthquakes of unparalleled extent and violence. Eclipses of the sun occurred with a frequency unrecorded in previous history. There were great droughts in sandy places, and frequent famines, and that most calamity and awful fatal visitation, the plague. All of this came upon them with the late war. In other words, this long war, had all these signs, tribulations, violence, earthquakes, eclipses of the sun, a plague, famines, and all sorts of variations, and then plague. All this came upon them with the late war, which was begun by the Athenians and the Peloponnesians with the delusion of the 30-year peace made after the conquest of Ubole. In other words, Ubole was conquered, and that once it was conquered, the Athenians and the Spartans made a promise for a 30-year peace. Okay, and what happened was a conflict will emerge that will lead to the break of the peace. To the question why they broke the treaty, I answer by the first. I answer by placing first an account of their grounds of complaint and point of the difference, that no one may ever have to ask the immediate cause which plunged Hellenes into a war of such magnitude. The real cause, however, I consider to be one which was formerly most kept out of sight. In other words, there are many reasons for this, but the one doesn't. The real cause, however, I consider is to be the one which was formerly most kept out of sight. That's repeating myself. The growth of the power of Athens, and the alarm which this inspired in Sparta, made the war inevitable. In other words, the growth of Athens, the power of Athens, and how this really scared and frightened Sparta made this war inevitable. Since it was since it was well to give the ground still it was well to give the grounds alleged by either side, which led to the dissolution of the treaty and breaking out the war. So he's saying the war happened because Sparta feared Athenian power. That's the real cause. The other cause, there'll be other ones, but why the treaty broke and things like this. Now, 24. The city of Epidama stands on the right of the entrance of the Ionic Gulf. Its vicinity is inhabited by. Let me do this. Let's see if I can get the map. Okay. Of course not. It's not going to work. The map. Yeah. It's to be page 18 of this if you have it. This is Koya. This is the Epidamus. Koya here. Where's Epidamus? Yeah, because he says, stands on the right to the entrance of the Ionic Gulf. Its vicinity is inhabited by the Tau Entarians and the Iliadic people. Now, the Iliadic people are from up here. Go again, this page 18. The Iliads, this is Italy, but Iliads appeared where the Balkans around Croatia is. You know, Croatia and Bosnia, kind of is Sarajevo and those places. Sarajevo, but um, Montenegro, Montenegro, and Croatia up here. Right, that's where that people here. The Hellenes are here. This is where the Hellenes are. Europe is above here. Italy's here. That's their. Sorry, again, I have to show it here. Right here is this is where the Iliadic people are. Here's the Hellenes. This is Helen, and yeah, here is Italy, right? And there's Sicily. This is the territory that is staying here. The place is a colony from Korea, which founded by Phileus, son of Heraclides, in the family of the Heraclids, who who had, according to ancient usage, been summoned for the purpose for Corinth, the mother country. So what happened was. Um, Corecia was a colony of Epidamos. Um, in other words, this place here is decided as a colony, originally another colony from where the colony was from Corinth. So Corinth created Croatia, and Croatia sent the thing to this new place here, right? And he says this is the, in other words, the purpose of Corinth. The colonists were joined by some Corinthians and others of the Dorian race. Now at the now as a time, okay, let's move here. Went on, and the city of Epidanos became great and populous, but falling a prey to factions arising in it, as it said, such a war with neighboring barbarians, she became enfeebled and lost a considerable amount of her power. So there's this city, the colony of that colony, a mixture of the two things, and then they had a conflict with neighboring. But what happened was that they lost to the barbarians because why? Because the colony started fighting with each other, different factions, the Dorians, the Corinthians, and uh, uh, um, uh, 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 the Croatians, right? They started fighting with that sense. Um, the last act before the war was the expulsion of those in power by the people. So the people took over. The people took over Epidamos, and they expelled the things. The exile party joined with the barbarians and proceeded to plunder those in the city by land and sea. And the Epidamans, finding themselves hard pressed, sent ambassadors to Coreka, beseeching their mother country not to allow them to perish, but to make but to make up matters between them and the exiles, and rid them of the war with the barbarians. The ambassadors seated themselves in the temple of Hera as supplicants and made the above request to the Croatians. But the Croatians refused to accept their supplications, and they were dismissed without having affected anything. When okay, this is so therefore they went to the mother country. The Croatians refused. Croatia was the Epidanes were the colony of Croatia, who Croatia was a colony of Corinth. When the Epidamans found that there were no help to be expected from the Croatia, they were in a quandary of what to do next. So they sent to Delphi, the oracle of Delphi, right, and inquired to the god whether they should deliver their city to the Corinthians and endeavor to some assistance from their founders. Now, in other words, they didn't know what to do, so they went to the god Delphi. Delphi is the place in there, and that's where the oracle of the oracle of Apollo. And the oracle, the priestess like this, the oracle plays a very the oracle plays a big role here in shaping the war. Okay, this is we'll notice. The question: whose side? Who does the oracle want the war to happen by? Yeah? That is something to think about in that sense. So the Epiganes went to the oracle, right? Um, whether they should deliver their cities to the Corinthians and endeavor to obtain some assistance from the founders. So so we had an interruption for a second. Sorry about that. Um, so the oracle said, "Do they would they you know give it to the Corinthians or what should they do?" Um, 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 the answer the oracle gave, he gave. It says, and therefore, it's not the priests. Okay, it's not the he is Apollo. Okay, the oracle of Apollo. So he is Apollo, even though the actual people speaking are the priestesses. Okay, that's how the oracle works. The oracle the priests and the Pythia and the priestess will get high, and they will get into a state of stance, and they will say something, and they'll record it. The priestesses, the non-high ones, will record what is said, and then give to the question that they get. They'll get sent, and they'll be given the oracle out back. Would be given something. Um, so the he here is Apollo, right? So Apollo The god oracle said oracle Apollo says, granted them to was to deliver the city and place themselves under Corinthian protection. So they were the colony of Corinth. That Corinth was the mother colony of Croatia. Croatia was created the colony. This colony was prosperous, but then there's faction in there, and that therefore the city, the democratic city, went to Croatia. Croatia ignored them. They went to the oracle, and the oracle says, "Go to Carthage." Right. Um, so when the Epidaurians went to Carthage, they delivered over the colony in obedience with the commands of the oracle. They showed that their founders came from Corinth and revealed the answer of the God, and begged them not to allow them to perish, but to assist them. This the Corinthians consented to do, believing the colony belonging as much to themselves as the Croatians. They felt it was a kind of a it would be kind of a duty to undertake their protection. Besides, they hated the Croatians for their contempt of their mother country. In other words, one is that okay, it belongs to us, but they also didn't like the fact that the Croatians had contempt for them. Okay, so okay. Um, had contempt for their mother country. Instead of meeting with the usual honors according to the parent city by each other colony at public assemblies, such as precedent at sacrifices, Corinth found herself treated with contempt by a power which in point of wealth could stand in comparison to any city, even the richest in Hellas, which possessed a great military strength and which sometimes could not repress a pride in her naval possession of an island whose nautical renown dated from the days of its old inhabitants, the 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 Phoenicians, the Phoenicians. This was one reason for the care which they lavished on their fleets, which became very efficient. Indeed, they began the war with a force of 120 trainings. So if 125 just did that, now it's going to do 126. In other words, they do that. Now 2026 we start. All these grievance made Corinth eager to send the promised aid to Epidamus. Advertisement was made for volunteer settlers. The force of the Ambraciots, Eucratians, and Corinthians were dispatched. They marched by land to Apollonia, a Corinthian colony, en route by sea being avoided fear of a Corinthian interruption. When the Corinthians heard of the arrival of the settlers and troops in Epiemus and the surrender of the colony to Corinth, they took fire. In other words, they were angry. They were um, instantly putting to sea with 25 and 5 and 20 ships. Um, uh, um, Now, what does this mean? It's 5 and 20. Uh, is it 25 ships or 5 and 20? So 5 groups of 20. Okay. So that's 100 ships, with which were quickly followed by others. They insolently commanded the Epicureans to receive back the vanquished party. It must be premised that the Ep- Epidemian exiles had come to Croatia, and pointing to the sepulchres of their ancestors, had appealed to their kindreds to restore them and to dismiss the Corinthian garrison and settlers. But to all this, but to all this, the epidemians turned a deaf ear. Upon this, the Croatians commenced operations against them with a fleet of 40 ships. They took with them the exiles with a view to their restoration, and also secured a services of the Illyrians. Setting down before the city, they issued a proclamation to the effect that any of the epidemics that chose and the foreigners might depart unharmed, with the alternative being treated as enemies. On refusal, the Croatians proceeded to besiege the city, which stands on the isthmus. And the Corinthians, receiving intelligence of this, of the investment of the Epidemos, had together got together an armament and called for volunteers to go to the colony of Epidemos. A complete political equality being guaranteed to all those who chose to go. In other words, you go, you're going to be have political equals. Corinth was kind of oligarchy. Um, so it was an oligarchic regime that was going to say, hey, if you go, you're going to get political equality for all, go there. So, um, any who were not prepared to sail at once might be paying down the sum of 50 Corinthian drachma, have a share in the colony without leaving Corinth. You want to go yourselves, you can just give us money. Okay. It's 50 drachma, 50 Corinthian drachma to have a share in this new colony without leaving Corinth. A great number took advantage of this proclamation, some being ready at the start directly, others paying the requisite forfeit. In case of their passage being disputed by the Corinthian, several cities were asked to lend them a convoy. Megaria prepared to accompany them with 8 ships, Pale and Capeniere with 4, Epidaurus furnished 5, Herdonia 1, Terzon 2, Leon 10, Aprasia 8. The Thebans and the Philantians were asked for money, the aliens for unmanned hulls as well, and Corinth herself furnished 30 ships and 30,000 hoplites. Woo! So this is um, I'll get the map here. This is 28 now, chapter 28. When the Croatians heard of their preparations and came to Corinth with envoys from Sparta and Syrian, who they persuaded to accompany them, and bade her recall the garrison and settlers, as she had nothing to do with Epidamos. If, however, she had any claims to make, they were willing to submit the matter to arbitration of such of the cities in the Peloponnese as would be chosen by mutual agreement, and to accept that the colony should remain with the city to whom the arbitrators might assign. They were also willing to refer the matter to the Oracle of Delphi. If, in defiance of their protestation, war was resorted to, they should themselves be compelled by this violence to seek friends and quarters where they had no desire to seek them, and make even old ties give way to necessity of assistance. Right? I want to go to, in other words, they're saying, we'll settle by dispute arbitration. We'll even go to Delphi. But if you're going to say you're going to go to war, then the old ties. We're going to have to go. We're going to have to find allies when we can. We'll fight, and we'll find allies where we can. And maybe that will be the Athenians. Okay, right. Okay, ready? Um, 4 appear, right? The answer they got from Corinth was that if they would withdraw their fleet and the barbarians from Epidamos, negotiations may be possible. But the city was still being besieged. Going before arbitrators was out of the question. Croatians retorted that if Corinth would withdraw her troops from Epidamos, they would withdraw theirs, or they will be ready to let both parties remain where they were, an armistice being concluded till judgment could be given. Right? This is now 28, 29. Turning a deaf ear to all these proposals, when their ships were manned with their allies have come in, the Corinthians sent a herald before them to declare war, and getting underway with 75 ships and 2,000 hoplites, sailed for Epidamos to give battle to the Croatians. The fleet was under the command of Oristos, son of Peliarchus, uh, 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 Callicrates, son of Callias, and Timonor, son of Timenes. The troops under that of Architimos, son of Euthrotimos, and Iscarchides, son of Iscarchus, when they reach, wish there was Bob, Joe, Sam, names are just pains in the ass, right? They had reached Actium in the territory of Enanactorium at the month of at the mouth at the mouth of the Gulf of Ambracia, where the temple of Apollo stands. The Croatians sent on a herald to a light boat to warn them not to sail against them. Meanwhile, they proceeded to man their ships, with all of which had been equipped for action, the old vessels being tightened to make them seaworthy. On the return of the herald, without any peaceful answer from the Corinthians, their ships being now manned, they put out to sea to meet the enemy with a fleet of 85. 40 were engaged. 40 were engaged in the siege of Epidamnus, formed a line and went into action, and gained a decisive victory, and destroyed 15 of the Corinthian vessels. On the same day, Epidamus, compelled by its besiegers to capitulate, the conditions being that the foreigners would be sold and the Corinthians kept as prisoners of war till their fate should be decided. So the Epidamans, the Croatians conquered Epidamus. They and they won the victory, and they will hold the Carthaginian. All the foreigners would be sold, and the Corinthians will be kept as prisoners of war until their fate will be decided. Now, this is now chapter 30. After the engagement, the Croatians set up a trophy on the Lukikini, headland of Croatia, and slew all the captives except the Corinthians, who they kept as prisoners of war. Defeated at sea, the Corinthians and their allies returned home and left the Croatians master of all the sea without those parts. Sailing to Leucris, a Corinthian colony, they ravaged their territory and burnt Kyllene, the harbor of the Hellenes, because they had furnished ships and money to Corinth. For almost the whole of the period had followed the battle, they remained masters of the sea, and the allies of Corinth are harassed by the Croatians' vessels. At least Corinth, roused by the suffering of her allies, sent out ships and troops in the fall of the summer, who founded an encampment in Actium and about Cherems in Theroprostus for the protections of Leucra and the rest of the friendly cities. The Croatians, for their part, formed a similar station on Leucameni. Neither party made any movement, but they remained confronting each other till the end of the summer, and winter was at hand before either of them returned home. Now, this is now 31. Corinth, exasperated by the war with the Croatians, spent the whole of the year after the engagement and the succeeding in building ships and in straining every nerve to form a efficient fleet. Rowers being drawn from the Peloponnesian and the rest of Hellas by inducements by Lombard bounties, the Croatians, alarmed by the news of their preparations, being without a single ally in Hellenes, for they had not enrolled themselves either in the Athenians or the Spartan Confederacy, They were new. They were outside of the thing. Decide to appeal to Athens in order to enter an alliance, like kind of like Ukraine asking to join NATO, right? Okay. um, um, and in the endeavor to procure support for her, Corinth also, hearing of their intentions, sent an embassy to Athens to prevent Croatian navy from being joined by the Athenians, and her prospects of ordering the war according to her wishes being thus impeded. An assembly was convoked, and the rivals' association advocates appeared, and the Croatians spoke as follows. So we get the Croatians spoken now. Next chapter in paragraph will be the Croatians. Athenians, when a people that have not Athenians, when a people that have not rendered any important service or support to their neighbors in times past, for which they might claim to be repaid, appear before them as we appear now before you to solicit their assistance, they may fairly be required to satisfy some certain preliminary conditions. They should show first that it is expedient, or at least save to grant the request. Next, that they will remain a lasting sense of kindness. But if they cannot clearly establish any of these points, they must not be annoyed if they meet with rebuff. Now, the Croatians believe that with the petition of assistance, that they can also give a satisfactory answer to these points, and they have been therefore dispatched us hither. They dispatched us hither. It has so happened that our policy as regard to you, with respect to this, turns out to be inconsistent, and as our regard to interest to be at the present crisis in inexpedient. In other words, is inexpedient. In other words, the present crisis is inexpedient. We should, we had no good relationship with you. In this crisis is actually we need your help, and this is, it's something. This is inexpedient in that sense. To be at the present crisis inexpedient. In other words, we didn't have the other things before that to prepare our way for this relationship to prove getting your good graces. It has we say inconsistent because a power which has never in the whole of her past history been willing to ally herself with any of her neighbors is now found asking them to ally themselves with her. We haven't been allied with anyone, Sparta or that, and now we're asking to do this. And we say an expedient because in our present war with Corinth, it has left us in a possession of an entire isolation. And what seemed a wise precaution of refusing to involve ourselves in alliances with other powers, lest we should invoke ourselves in risks of their choosing, now has now proved to be folly and weakness. Why we didn't do it? Basically, they're saying we were following kind of the George Washington approach of not getting involved in this because we thought by getting involved in that would cost our interest. But that policy in this situation has left us fucked. So we need help. We have to join somebody. It was proved following weakness. It is true that in the late naval engagement, we drove back the Corinthians from our shore single-handed, but they now got together a still larger armament from the Peloponnese and the rest of Hellenes, and we are seeking our utter inability to cope with them without foreign aid, and the magnitude of the danger which subjection to them implies. It is necessary to ask help from you and from every other power. And we hope to be excused if we forswear our old principle of complete political isolation, a principle which was not adopted with any sinister intention, but rather the consequence of an error in judgment. In other words, saying this is the argument. We want your help. We need your help. We need your help with this, and don't take our neutrality before as kind of we don't like we had sinister intention towards you. It's that we this is a bad judgment on our part. Okay. Now the next speech will respond to here. Um, okay. Okay, now this is the continue of the speech, right? Now there are many reasons why in this event of your compliance you will congratulate yourselves on this request having been made to you. First, because your assistance will be rendered to a power which herself inoffensive is a victim of the injury of others. Secondly, so in other words, we have no harm to you, we're not a threat to you, and you'd be helping us as someone who another power has harmed us. Okay. Secondly, because all that we most value is at stake in the present contest. And by acceding to our request under these circumstances, you will give unforgettable proof of your goodwill and create in us a lasting sense of gratitude. In other words, if you do this now when we really need you, we will be very grateful. We will have a long term debt to you in that sense, right? Thirdly, yourselves expected. We are the greatest naval power in Hellenes. In other words, yourselves excluded. In other words, accepted. We are the greatest naval power. You conceive a stroke of good fortune more rare in itself, or more disheartening to your enemies, that the power whose adhesion you would have valued much above material and moral strength should present herself self-invited, should deliver herself into your hands without danger, without expense, that you should you lastly put should put you in the way of gaining a high character in the eyes of the world, the gratitude of those who you shall assist, and the great ascension of strength for yourself. In other words, you're going to help this. We're the great. We're next to you. No, excluding you, we're the greatest naval power. Now we're going to come to you and help you at a time. This is going to be like great thing, right? You may search all history without finding many incidents of a people gaining all these advantages at once, or many incidents of power that comes in quest of assistance being in a position to give to the people whose alliance she solicits as such safety and honor as she will receive. But it will be urged that it is only in the case of a war where that we shall be found useful. To this we answer that if any of you imagine that this war is far off, he is grievously mistaken, and is blind to the fact that the Spartans, out of fear of you, want war, and the Corinth is influenced with them. The same, remember, is the your that is your the same. Remember, that is your enemy, and is even now trying to subdue us as a preliminary attacking you. Again, this is so powerful. That's it. Um, and this she does to us, preventing our becoming united in a common enmity, and having us both have us both of her hand. In other words, and her having us both on her hands, and also to ensure getting the jump on you in one or two ways, either by crippling our power or by making its strength our strength it's her own. Now it is our policy to preempt her. That is, for Quraysh to make an offer of alliance, and for you to accept it. And in fact, we ought to form plans against her instead of waiting to defeat the plans that she forms against us. If she asserts that for you to receive a colony of hers into alliance is not right, let her know that every colony that is well treated honors its parent state, but becomes estranged from it by injustice. For colonists are not sent forth on the understanding that they are to be slaves of those who remain behind, but they are to be bound. They are but that they are to be their equals. And in Corinth, and that Corinth was injuring us is clear. Invited to invited to refer the dispute about Epidamus to arbitration, they chose to prosecute their claims by war rather than by fair trial, and let their conduct towards us, who are their kindred, be a warning to you, not to be misled by their deceit, nor to yield to their direct requests. Concessions to adversaries only end in self-reproach. And the more strict they are avoided, the greater there will be a chance of security. In other words, don't give concessions to your enemy. If you give concessions, that's going to be, reproach. And the more you don't do that, the more likely you're going to avoid. You have better security. Now, 35. If it is to be urged that your reception of us will be the breach of the treaty existing between you and Sparta, the answer is that we are a neutral state, and that one of the express provisions of that treaty is that it shall be open to any Hellenic state that is neutral to join whatever side it pleases. And it is intolerable for Corinth to be allowed to obtain men for her navy, not only from her allies, but from the rest of Hellenes, no small number being furnished by your subjects, while we are excluded from both the alliance left open to us by treaty and from the assistance that we might get from other quarters. And you are to be accused of political immorality if you comply with our request. On the one hand, we shall have much greater cause to complain of you if you do not comply with us, if who are in peril and have no enemies of yours meet with a repulse at your hand, while Corinth, who is the aggressor and and your enemy, not only meets with no hindrance from you, but is even allowed to draw material of war from your dependencies. This ought not to be, but you should either forbid her enlisting men in your domains, or you should lend us to what helps you may. But you should lend us to what help you may think advisable. But your real policy is to afford us open approval and support. With advantages of this course, as we premised in the beginning of our speech, are many. We mentioned one is the perhaps chief. There could be a clear advantage in our good faith that is offered by the fact that the power which is in an enmity with you is also an enmity with our enemy, with hatred of us, and that the power is fully able to push defection, punish defection. And there is a wide difference between declining the alliance of an inland and a maritime power, the declining of an alliance of an inland and a maritime power. For your first endeavor should be to prevent, if possible, the existence of any naval power except your own. Failing this, to secure the friendship of the strongest that does exist. And if any of you believe that what we urge is expedient, but fear to act upon this belief, lest it should lead to the breach of the treaty, you must remember that on one hand, whether your fears, your strengths, will be formidable to your antagonist. On the other, whatever the confidence you derive from refusing to receive us, you will be the weaker and less terrifying to the strengthened enemy. You must remember that your decision is for Athens, no less for Corinthia, and that you are not making the best provision for her interest if at the time when you are anxiously scanning the horizon that you may be in readiness for the breaking out of war which is all but upon you, you hesitate to attach to your side a place whose adherence or estrangement is alike pregnant with the most vital consequences. For it lies conveniently for the coast navigation in the direction of Italy and Sicily, being able to bar the passage of naval reinforcement here from reinforcement from there to the Peloponnese, and from the Peloponnese to there. And it is in other respects more suitably positioned. To sum up as to sum up as shortly as possible, embracing both general and particular considerations. Let this show you the folly of sacrificing us, Croatia. Remember that there are but three considerable naval powers in Hellenis: Athens, Corinth, Croatia, and Corinth, and that if you allow two of these three to become one, and Corinth to secure for us secure us for herself, you will have to hold the sea against the united fleets of Croatia and the Peloponnese. But if you receive us, you will have our ships to reinforce you in the struggle. Such were the words of the Croatians. This is now 137, right? They had finished, and the Corinthians spoke as follows. And now the Corinthian speech. These Croatians, in their speech we have just heard, do not confine themselves to questions of the reception of interior alliance. They also talk about our being guilty of injustice and their being victims of an unjustified war. It becomes necessary for us to touch upon these points before we possess to what the rest of what we have to say, that you may have a more correct idea on the grounds of our claim, and have good cause to reject their position. In other words, they're accusing this of injustice and things like this. We're going to address that question. No, it's not just the question. According to them, their old policy of refusing all the other alliances was a matter of moderation. It was, in fact, adopted for bad ends, not good. And indeed, their conduct is as such as it makes them by no means desirous for having allies present to witness it, or having the shame of being asked their concurrence. Besides, their geographical situation makes them independent of others, and consequently, decisions in case where injure many lies, not with judges appointed by mutual agreement, but with themselves, because while they seldom make voyages to their neighbors, they are constantly being visited by foreign vessels, which are compelled to be put into Croatia. In short, the object to which they propose to themselves is their spacious policy of complete isolation. It is not to avoid sharing in the crimes of others, but to secure monopoly of crime to themselves, a license of outrage whatever they can compel, and of fraud wherever they can elude, the enjoyment of the gain without shame. And yet, if they were honest men, they pretend to be, the less and less hold that others have upon them, the stronger would be the light in which they might have put honesty by giving and taking what is just. Okay, next 37. But such has not been their conduct either towards others and towards us. The attitude of the colony towards us has always been one of estrangement. Water. And is now one of hostility. For they say, we were not sent out to be ill-treated. We rejoined that we did not found the colony to be insulted by them, but to be their head, and to be regarded with a proper respect. At any rate, our colonies honor us, and we are very much beloved by our colonists. And clearly, if the majority are satisfied with us, these can These can have no good reason for the dissatisfaction in which they stand alone, and we are not acting improperly in making war against them, nor are we making war against them without having received severe provocation. Besides, if we were in the wrong, it would be more honorable in them to have given way to our wishes, and disgraceful for us to trample on their moderation. But in their pride and license of wealth, they have sinned against again and again against us, and never more deeply than when Epidamas, our dependency, which they took no steps to claim in its distress, upon coming to upon our coming to relieve it, was then by them seized, and now held by force of arms. Now 39. And as to their allegations that they wished the question to be first submitted to arbitration, it is obvious that a challenge coming from a party who is in safe of a commanding position cannot gain the credit due only to him, who, having appealed to arms, is and deals as well as words, places himself at the level with his adversaries. In their case, it was not before they laid siege to the place, but after they had at length understood that we would not tamely suffer it, that they thought of the specious word arbitration. And not satisfied with their own misconduct here, they appear now to having required you to join with them in an alliance, but in crime, not an alliance, but in crime, but to receive them in spite of their being in enmity with us. But it was when they stood firmest that they should have, in other words, when they stood earlier, they should have come to you, made their overtures to you, and not at a time when we have been wronged and they're in peril, nor yet at a time when you will be admitting a share of your protection to those who never admitted you to a share of their power. And it will be occurring to an equal amount of blame for us with those in whose offense you had no hand. Nor, no, they should have shared their power with you before they asked you to share their fortunes, to share your fortunes with them. They should have came to you earlier. Now they need you desperately, and now no. So the reality of the grievance we come to complain of, and the violence and the rapacity of our opponents have been provided, but that you cannot equitably receive them, this you should still to learn. It may be true that one of the possessions of their treaty of the treaty, one of the provisions of the treaty is that it shall be competent for any city whose name not drawn on the list to join whenever side it pleases. But this agreement is not meant for those whose object is enjoining is to injure the other powers. But this is sophistry in that sense. But for those who need support, does not arise from the fact of defection, and those adherents will not bring to power that is mad enough to receive them war instead of peace, which will be the case with you if you refuse to listen to us. You cannot, for you cannot become their auxiliary and remain our friends. If you join in their attack, you must share the punishment which their defenders inflict on them. And yet you have the best possible right to be neutral. For failing this, you should be on contrary to join against them. Corinth is at length in treaty with you. With Croatia, you have never, or not even in a truce. In other words, we're involved in the treaty with the last war, and therefore we're in treaty with you. Whereas Corinth is not that Croatia is not in treaty with you, so therefore you should not necessary. You trust us more than them. But do not propose the principle that those defecting from others are to be welcomed. Did we on the defection of the Semanians record our vote against you when the rest of Peloponnesian powers were equally divided on the question whether they should punish or assist them? No, we told them to their faces that every power has the right to punish its own allies. Why, if you were to make why, if you were to make your policy to receive and assist all offenders, you will find that just as many of your dependencies will come over to us, and the principle you establish will press less heavily on us than yourselves. So they're saying you better be careful because he's saying this is not this. They're really part of us, and that therefore be careful when we didn't when one of your colonies or one of your cities, islands that you control, came to kind of break away and try to do something and appealed to Peloponnese. We voted against it. We voted against supporting them. Okay, and we did that because of this. And you should, and this principle here should guide you here. He's saying. Okay, now let's go to the. Um, you make your policy, receive it, and assist others. You will find that just as many of your dependencies will come over to us, and the principle you establish here will press less heavy on you as ourselves. That's kind of a prophecy, a warning what's going to come, right? 41. And this is what the Hellenic War entitled us to remain. The Hellenic law entitles us to deem as right. But we have also advice to offer and claim as in your regard, which is, since there is no danger of our injuring you, as we are not enemies, and since our friendship does not amount to very frequent intercourse, we say ought to be liquidated at the present juncture. When you were in want of ships of war, and for the war against the Aegeans before the Persian invasion, Corinth supplied you with 20 vessels in good turn, and the line we took on the Salmon questions, when we were caught, when we were the cause of the Peloponnesian refusing to assist them, enabled you to conquer Aegean and punish Samos. And we acted thus at crisis when, if ever, men are wont in their effort against their enemies to forget everything for the sake of victory, regarding him who assails them as friend, even if thus far he had been a foe, and him who oppresses them as a foe, even though he has far been a friend. Indeed, they allow their real interest to suffer from their absorbing preoccupations in the struggle. Be careful of getting in the struggle. In other words, we kept those things before like that, and even though we weren't the best of friends, in other words, and therefore be careful that who's a friend and who's not a friend, and who's beneficial and who's not beneficial. It's more complicated. Weigh nigh these considerations, and let your youth learn what they are from their elders, and let them determine to do unto us as we have done unto you, and let them not acknowledge that justice of what we let them not acknowledge the justice of what we say, but dispute its wisdom on the contingency of war. Not only is the straightest path, generally speaking, wisest, but the coming of the war with the Corinthians have used as a specter to persuade you to do wrong is still uncertain, and it is not worthwhile to be carried away by it into gaining the instant and declared enmity of Corinth. It were wise, were it rather wise to try to counteract an unfavorable impression which your conduct to Megara has created. In other words, the Megarians, the Megea is that land right there between the two, and the Athenians kind of like take it over in that sense. And this is a conflict of this. For kindness, opportune shown has a greater power of removing old grievances than the fact of the case may warrant. and do not be seduced by the prospect of the great naval alliance. Abstinence from all injustice to other first rate powers is a great tower of strength than anything that can be gained from the sacrifice of permanent tranquility for a state of temporary advantage. Because be careful, don't pick an event. Just don't start a war with, because you get advantage. You think you get an advantage. It may be an illusion. Um, Now, this is 43, chapter 43. And it is now our turn to benefit from the principle we laid down at Sparta, that every power has the right to punish its own allies. Now, we claim to receive the same from you and protest against your rewarding us from benefiting you by our vote by injuring us by yours. On the contrary, return us like for like, remembering that this is that very crisis in which he who lends aid is most friend, and he who opposes is most foe. And these Corinthians neither receive them into alliances in our despite, or be arbiters, or be their abettors in crime. So do, and you will act as we have a right to expect you, and at the same time, best consult your own interests. This is now 44. So such were the words of the Corinthians. When the Athenians heard both out, two assemblies were held. The first, there was a manifest disruption, a disposition to listen to the representatives of Corinth. In the second, a public feeling had changed. In the alliance, and an alliance with Croatia was decided on. In other words, the public feeling. In other words, two things. The first one was among the councils, and Corinth is right, but the public feeling has changed, and the alliance with Corinth was decided on with certain reservations. So there was the public feeling. The second represent. In other words, there were two feelings. There was two assemblies were held, and the first assembly was kind of first there was a manifest disposition to listen to the representative of Corinth, but the public feeling changed, and what happened was then Corinth the decision to side with Corinth with certain reservations. It was to be defensive, not an offensive alliance. It did not involve an attack on the treaty with the Peloponnese. Athens could not be required to join Croatia in attack of Corinth, but each of the counteracting parties had the right to the other's assistance against invasion, whether of her own territory or that of an ally. But it now began to be felt that the coming of the Peloponnesian War was only a matter of question of time, and no one was willing to see a naval power such as the magnitude of Corinth sacrificed to Corinth. Though if they could let them weaken each other by mutual conflict, it would not be a bad preparation for the struggle that Athens would have one day to wage with Corinth and other naval powers. At the same time, the island seemed to lie conveniently on the coasting passages to Italy and Sicily. In other words, Corinthia was very important for the coastal traffic for that. Corinth, an island is essential for traffic for there. So if you cut that, if this is your ally, this cuts off the Peloponnesian trade to Sicily and that the Dorian tribe, because those are Dorian colonies over there. Those are the Dorian colonies in Italy and Sicily. The Peloponnese, the Dorians of the Peloponnesian, not Dorian, sorry, not Dorian. Dorians, always confusing. They are the Peloponnesian colonies over there. The Dorians are where? Dorians are more kind of the Ionians. Sorry, the Dorians are the Dorians are the Peloponnesian areas, right? The Ionians are the ones over there. So that's right, I was right in the first place. So there. Um, um, Question of time. In other words, it didn't want to weaken even by mutual power, and it would be no bad preparation for the struggle that had to be. And at the same time was that. Now let's go to 40. That's 44. Now let's go to 45. With these views, Athenian received Corinth into the alliance. On the departure of Corinthians, not long afterwards, 10 ships sent to their assistance. They were commanded by Lacedaemon, son of Cimon, Dematius, son of Strombichus, and Portes, son of Epicles. Their instructions were to avoid collisions with the Corinthian fleet except under certain circumstances. If it sailed to Corinthia in threatening a landing on her coast or in any of her possessions, they were to do the utmost to prevent it. These instructions were prompted by the anxiety to avoid a breach of the treaty. Now, 46. I'm going to stop here. We're going to stop here. 46, we'll talk about. 46 will start the preparations for the war. The Corinthians were going to send a fleet to Corinthia and to see what's going to happen. So this is where we end for this. It's been a long episode. I hope not too long. If you have any questions or things, put it down below. If you like it, share with a friend. You want to subscribe, just get more, you can subscribe. You can follow me on social media, which information is below out there. Well, okay, have a good day. Take care. Bye-bye.